Hey YouTube, welcome back. This is part 2 of the grid layout series. So we're going to go over the individual grid item layouts. That way you can figure out exactly how to override some of the layouts for a specific element within your grid. That way you can have a little bit of flexibility of where you want to place a certain item. I'll show you all the different ways to style it and also the different ways to set the starting and ending of both the row and the column attributes. So let's jump into it. All right, as you can see here, we have our grid layout. So I'm reusing the same code. So go check out in the link description. I just pushed another commit up to the GitHub repo, and we're gonna reuse the same kind of HTML body where it's 100%, and then also our first display grid up here. Nothing special. We have one row and then 4 columns. You can see that here on the right hand side. And then our index HTML has 2 classes, container and grid, and then each of these different divs have a class. So we are going to use these, so pay attention to these item 1 through item 4. I'll just swap over here to the CSS and let's jump into it. So we'll scroll down here. I have this separated as individual items. If we uncomment this, you can use these 4 attributes where you're defining the starting and ending position for a grid item, and these can be a number of different things. So you can have a number, so like 1, 2, 3, a name, which you could get from the grid area syntax, or it can span. This is how many columns or how many rows that the item will span, and then you can also have it span and give it a name. I haven't played around with this one yet. Span to the one that I usually use. And then auto, that just means take up as much space as you need, and auto configure the height and width of the item. So for this one, we have the grid row start, and we're using third line. And so that means it's going to go on the third line. This is a keyword for grid. So it's going to go on the third line, which is like the row, the third row. And I organize these specifically to kind of queue up how a shorthand will look. So apologies if this is a little confusing for right now, but it'll make sense in a minute. So we have row start and column start. So these are the starting positions. So we're going to start on the third line for the row, and then the third column for the column start. And then we're going to span over 2, and the row end is going to be 4. And so if we refresh this, so we see it way down here at the bottom because, you know, we've gone 1, 2, 3 rows, and then the column, so we got 1, 2, 3, so we're in the third column. We're spanning 2. We don't have another row at the bottom, and so this is going to take up the rest of the space because we haven't defined another row. Now, if we wanted to define this in a shorthand syntax, so we could use that. Oops, there we go. We could do grid column and grid row. And again, this is on an individual item. And so you set row start and the row end, and then the column start and then the column end. So these translate. So you have column start 3, column end, span 2. And that is how you set that with a slash between them. And then the same thing goes for grid row. So if we refresh this, there's no change because this is the same way to define the same output. All right, so we have the shorthand, row start and column start, column end, row end, grid column, and grid row. Now, let's try a different example. If we had a different container, so I'm gonna go back up and comment out our other container style. And it looked like this, where we had names defining some of these. Then we can refresh this, and we have a little bit of a taller row because we're defining it as 100 pixels. So it's a little bit taller because of this 25%. And so this is the biggest element of the row. And we have 100 pixels here, 100 pixels here, but 25% is going to be the biggest one. So that's going to be the size of the row. And then we have some names sprinkled in here to define the columns. So we have these between 40 pixels and 50 pixels, 100 pixels. So we have 5 different columns and I believe 4 different rows. Let's see, no, 3 different rows. And so if we bring in a styling for element 2, then we can define using these names that we have given it in the template rows. So like you can also define like the grid area shorthand. This is another way to do this. And so we define the start as the row 1 end and the column 4 start. And then each of these just takes up 2. And so what we should see is item 2 is going to come down and is going to come over. And so we see that, and you can see that the rest of the row adjusted for us, which is interesting. If we wanted to define this same style in a shorthand, then we could use what's called grid area. And again, this is on the individual item. And so we define grid area, and this is where the funky syntax at the top comes into play, because you define both of your start elements. So start row, start column, and then your row end and your column end. And there's just slashes between all of them, so it can look a little odd because you don't know which side is which, but they're all slashes. You just need to make sure that each of the row and column starts are the two things that are the two first items. And if we refresh this, then it's the same. Another thing I wanted to go over is styling, or moving an individual element within the grid. And so let's do a fixed row. So we'll bring back our original grid here at the top. And I'll comment this out for just a second. So this is our normal layout. If we wanted to do justify self, then what this is going to do is move the element horizontally. So we should see the 1 centered in the middle of this block. So if we see that, there we go. And if we wanted to center it vertically, then we would do align self. It takes a little bit of style off of there, not too much, but you can see that the shorthand for setting both of those attributes is place self. Again, grid has a ton of different shorthand syntaxes, so place self gives us the same style. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.